away, and I have changed that. It's not needed. It's not needed to exploit our ecology, and it's not needed to not pay our people, which fashion does. So coming back to sustainability has become for me the way I live and the way I do my work and everything what I do. It is not a chapter which I reflect upon when I'm quiet. No. What I'm eating is how much chemical that has it. If I'm wearing, how much chemical that has it. If I'm using cosmetic, how what impact it is making on me. It has become part of me, Rema, for all these years. Now it's 24 years that I live in Oroville.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Thank you, Uma. Thanks for sharing your views. Shriram, we would like to hear what you have got to say about what it means to you.
Um, yeah, so I didn't. It wasn't accidentally using the word accidental. For me, I was. I always had interest in being conscious about my action. I think that came from a very young age. Maybe it's to do with the way I was raised, I guess. But but I was one of the million Indians who had gone to the US to do work in tech industry. What was key for me was even though I was conscious individually in my individual actions, in what I do in my own small way, my wife and I were, and she was regimental about being sustainable, and we were trying to be in our own little way. We always composted. We always,
अरे मेरे को अभी काम है सही काम है
we were very particular about the food we purchase, etc. But I got into a non-profit called Association for India's Development. That made a huge change for me. Joining to AID and working on a lot of projects for AID, staying in the US for India, really exploded in my mind the impact of me being in California and what are the impact happening somewhere in India and somewhere in Bangladesh, somewhere in Sri Lanka for the actions I was taking. That was an eye opener for me, and I think after that it became very key for us. We used to be very particular about being a locavore, eating local food, buying local stuff, but the scale of the impact made me change that rather than from my individual lifestyle, which I love to continue. I'm wearing an organic cotton locally sewn kurta, which I'm very proud of, bought from somebody here. I think that scaling that to saying this is how businesses should be. This is how, if we are able to make organizations become like this, and the solutions, products provided it'll become everyday life for all of us. And I think if all of us change on an individual level, we will have a sustainable future. So that was my.
Thanks for that, Shriram. May I ask Sujata to speak about what it means to you?
Yeah, thank you, Ray. So I joined Saksha 14 years ago, and I was just a fresher out of like a management school with a degree in development study, and what was formal education in how to manage projects. So having started with Saksha and starting with working with the grassroots producers, kind of propelled me to unlearn a lot of things which were taught in the management schools and learn newer things, and realize that when we talk about sustainable lifestyle and sustainability, grassroots producers or people living in the villages, actually their lives are very, they are modeled in a sustainable way. And because they live on local ingredients and the way they live, and craft itself has a sustainability at its root. So it was just matter of joining the dots together. And when I look back the way we grew up, in the kind of upbringing we had, my mother had like a trunk full of hand-woven Tangai saris from Bengal, and we have, we used to darn, and we used to have a lot of reused material. I used to wear a lot of hand-me-downs from my elder brother, hand-me-down books. I used to visit the crib when I was young because I will have his hand-me-down books, his hand-me-down clothes, shoes. So I guess that was so inherent in our cultures. The way we eat locally, I mean, especially after having coming and settled in Calcutta, I realized that how our local cuisine changes with seasons. We don't eat cauliflower throughout the year. So these are so many things which I realized in the personal term, and then got to join the dots together while working at Sasha. So it all began to kind of crystallize together how crafts and individual, I mean, our own lifestyles are so inherently linked. It's about a matter of making your own personal choices. And as individuals, when you start making choices, as Shriram said, the entire community starts making those choices. And as a community and as an individual, that becomes a whole responsibility because we are part of the consumer landscape. So that's how I can share.
That's absolutely true about what you said about craft and how sustainability is very close to our lifestyle. May I now ask Leena to speak about what sustainable consumerism means to her. Leena, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm sorry, I had muted myself of the family in the background. Yes, so for me, sustainability is very closely related to responsibility, because it's each individual's responsibility to act like in whatever space they can to contribute to a sustainable lifestyle. I look at change also not only at change forward, but also at looking back or reverting, because I feel if we look at our parents or grandparents' generation, they actually, many of them led what we call now sustainable lifestyle, but they wouldn't call it sustainable lifestyle like it's a sort of fashion word or buzzword. For them, it would be like the normal lifestyle, to use only what you need, to buy only what you need, to buy at your local store, and to use things until they are really unusable anymore. Sustainable consumption on one hand, of course, means that one sources local, that one buys from local artisans, local farmers, but it also means like what Sujata said, like reusing things, like reusing hand-me-downs, not only for clothes, but also for furniture, for example. Like there are so many things, especially from the older generations, which are good to use. And yeah, so we've been fortunate at home, for example, that we just like stuffed our house with hand-me-downs from neighbors and grandparents and all that, and it's quite okay. And also in the light of this current like crisis where we cannot go out easily shopping, it's actually a good time to see how little is it that we actually need to survive. And how much value is actually in spending time with each other, and then rather than like having a material thing. For example, when it comes to birthday presents or so, like rather than buying something for a person, what about like spending time by going somewhere, having a picnic or so? Yeah, I hope people will start seeing value in that rather than like always a materialistic thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Leena. That's very insightful. It's good to hear that. Now, when we bring these perspectives to the current scenario, I would like to know your thoughts on how, whether we will emerge from this with challenges, or is this going to give us, really great opportunities? What are your thoughts, Leena?
I think this will give us really great opportunities. I attended a recent webinar by Narasimha Rao. He's a professor in Yale, and he works on climate change and how social equity can be used as a measure for climate mitigation. And so he developed indicators on what we need for decent living. And that includes everything. Like he came up with measures like 30 square meter per head as a living space, and even includes like an AC and access to information like a mobile phone per household. But what that means that like for people like us, whom I would call affluent, we should really rethink like to step down. Like for us, it would probably step down, like downsize to that level. But if all of us would do that or would consider that as a way of living, it might give the chance for many others to move up to that sort of decent living standards. And I feel the time we had now, where we needed to spend a lot of time at home, a lot of time with each other, might have given us this space to think is like, what is it that we really need in life, and what can we give up in the future? What do we not need to go back to now, what we couldn't access in the last 1.5 months? Yeah. And of course, one thing I forgot there, it's not, it's like means of transport and mobility in the city. So can we give up on our private car rides? Can we just say like, okay, we don't buy a new car, we don't consume petrol, but we'll see whether we can walk more, we can cycle more, we can use public transport. In a way, this is also like a change in consumer patterns. Yeah, give up your
Yeah, that's true. But taking social distancing, I wonder how soon we're going to be back on us, public transport and all that. All that is also there. But I would also like to hear what Sriram has to say about whether this will come up with challenges, or do you see this as an opportunity for businesses in sustainable space?
Yeah, it's a very mixed bag. And just to feed off of what Lena said, I'm so glad that she kept her camera in such a way that the cycle is shown. I have my cycle there, but it is very true. And, so there are two sides to this, and that's the challenge we constantly have in every industry, but I'll talk quickly from transport also, right? There are people like us who would say, hey, cycle, hey, walk. There are those things, but then there are this entire thing of social distancing now scaring the hell out of people. Nobody wants to use Uber Pool even tomorrow. Would any of us do it? I would think twice about getting into an Uber Pool now, but I would go perhaps in an Uber Go, right? That automatically triples your carbon footprint. And it's unfortunate. We're working with our clients and talking about some of their travel choices, etc. And it's not going to be easy. We are trying to convince them that please reuse masks. There are certain masks you can wash and reuse. Gloves, okay, you want to chuck it, at least chuck it in a ethical way. But the mask has to be reused, and you should buy reusable masks. Now, here's a challenge though. There are certain sectors where we can, and these 3-4 months has definitely trained many of us to become. For instance, I have my own, younger colleagues who used to dread cooking at home, but now they're forced to cooking, and they have significantly reduced Swiggy. And I'm sure all of you read the news last 2 days. Swiggy has been laying off. So did Zomato, right? Their business is severely hampered. I'm not here to say all these business should be, affected, but that business model had an impact on our culture, on our environmental impact. Because if we cook lesser, a key portion of our culture is also lost. It's not just the fact that the environmental impact, right? But this has made us, now can we stick to the habit is the question. So there are certain things we can change. Like we work with real estate developers and we're talking to them saying, we believe that house purchase is going to happen. Now, can you build in the right way, saying you're future ready, not just from health perspective because of COVID social distancing, but that automatically makes you not try to cram people, but actually then build in the right and more sustainable way. And I want to throw something which I'm happy if you want to circle around and come back to open up as a choice to me as a question. But I think the key to that is this whole idea of paying the true price for something has to come. And I'll tell you why it matters even in the COVID thing. And in your own business, Ethicatic, you have the same thing, right? A t-shirt, if it's bought at 600 rupees made by somebody like an H&M versus the true price of something is going to be 1250 rupees. Why is it and what is it? People today have the mindset change that they're willing to spend more because of being safe, right? For social distancing, I will spend twice the money to go in an Uber Go. I will spend twice, I will not take the public transport. I will go buy food from a shop which is ensuring that it is safe and clean rather than somebody like who's not safe and clean, which means I'm willing to spend money extra for my health because COVID has, completely shook me up. The same mindset should go to people saying I should pay the right price. Like there's a documentary in fashion industry called True Cost. I'm sure many of you have seen it. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing. True cost for everything has to be paid. And if that mindset has been established because of COVID-19 into us, and we take it into our life, then I think we'll be. And there are ways too, but yeah, that's what I'd like to say.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. What you said, everything has an environment, profit and loss attached to it. And but I think we don't realize how to put a cost to it and how to price. And I think that's also why sustainability is termed as being luxurious and pricey.
yeah, it is right, and that's it's fascinating. There are statistics now. It's not like earlier. We have clear data as to why the true price of a t-shirt should be 1,200 rupees, not 400 rupees as advertised by H&Ms of the world, right? So, and that if we are able to showcase to people, I'm sure there'll be more change.
I think Uma will have something to add to this, I'm sure, because you're working really closely with this, with respect to organic and how clothing and fabric can have impact. What are your thoughts, Uma, on this?
So when COVID started, I was looking at it that there would be billions of masks will be thrown in the waste bin, and everybody would run completely in panic space and trying to get a medical 10 rupees mask and throw every time, and soon we will run out of the stocks, run out of everything. So I started just before the COVID pandemic started. I was making reusable mask, as Sriram said, and I used it in not only organic cotton and handloom, but infused with herbs. So I did neem mask. I'm wearing a neem shirt and I have a neem mask. So this neem mask was done that people could go out and come back, wash their mask and use again, and mask is going to be a new scarf. And it would be an accessory we will be okay with. It's not a medical support to us, but it's a need. It's a new need. And there's a lot of new need is going to come to us. One of the new need I see that it has appeared in having so much of a space to ourselves that we have begun to value our hand. Most of the houses where people are used to having servants around, servants were not there for them. People who have never cooked it, looked at kitchen themselves. People who have never cleaned their homes. And in that, what we begin to honor of one, let's quote to quote, is handmade and hand done and hand finished. I don't think that I have ever thought about so much of a handmade in India as we did it, as I have done it in the COVID period, and really look at things, how much time does it take and how are we are able to underpay it. So true price, which Sriram is saying is so valid, is connected to the living cost. It is connected to what it is mean to have services and produce given to us. And that reflection I see is going to fuel a new behavior change in millions of people. So sustainability would be the new mantra, not because we got enlightened in COVID, but pretty much close to it. There's so much reflection one has given, or we have done things which matter to us, and caring matters to us.
That's so true.
And I'm really looking at that. If I have to give a gift, I was suggesting on the birthday gift, support a local NGO. Pay food for so many people, buy the craft which is needed for you, make sure that your home linen this year is going for in handloom, things like that which we have never thought about. Buy a very beautiful cushion cover which supports an NGO in Odisha. So I just see that this whole boom of supporting our whole economy, and our PM very rightly said that make it vocal what is local. And that syndrome is going to catch very, very powerfully. What I see as a responsibility of us, or people who are into retail space and people who are into manufacturing space, to make it conscious. We all love to buy. Not only Sriram, me too. I love to buy things. And I see that it's a very beautiful thing that we like to celebrate beauty and beautiful product and like to buy things. how I make it conscious that it is life changing. And what you are doing, Rema and Pradeep, is part of it. You are making a life changing option, giving to people, done by in a fair trade, beautiful product coming from the grassroots community. It really aligns to our sustainability global agenda. It aligns to what PM is asking to the nation. It really is the move we can take to support our economy, our people, and this is perfect. I see that new sunrise beyond COVID is sustainable and very people-centric, very care-centric, care for not only myself, that how I feel and should I take Uber or not, but also what I eat and whom I support while buying what I buy and how beautiful it is and am I able to pay their living cost. And this will become our priority. So this period of last 2 months of a lockdown for me had been like, wow, I'm able to see and connect dots, and I see many of us going to connect the dots, and the new change or new normal, it's going to be very conscious, caring, loving, and building our local economy.
It's absolutely beautiful to hear such positive notes. It's very rare to hear these days in this amidst this scenario. But what are your thoughts, Sujata?
Yeah, so I think taking from what all the three of them said, sustainability for the last couple of decades have been more of a trend, but I think now it's about future, and it's about taking responsibility as a community and when I say community, I'm talking of the community of consumers and people like us who are the stakeholders or the participants in the fashion or lifestyle industry. I'll talk more from the scope of the fashion, whether it's fashion or lifestyle industry, because that's the way we cater to. And one myth I need to bust, or one of the debates that we get into is that having a sustainable business is about sacrificing long-term financial benefits or long-term profits. That's not true. There are researches which have proven that sustainable business is about more efficiency. It is about reaping financial benefits, and it is about how you can your business can be flexible to address the needs of the future. If you see the mask that Uma was showing us, this flexibility of having grassroots producers produce masks which are reusable, washable, and in other terms sustainable, ecologically sustainable in a period of such a short time, it's amazing. Even all our producers are making reusable masks, washable masks, and on top of it they are adding their own craft detailing or techniques. We have now kantha masks, we have ikat, we have patchwork, we have, I mean, it's mind boggling. I mean, what our craft producers are coming out of it. So they are making, we are getting into sanitary napkins, we are getting into natural neem based hand sanitizers, minus alcohol. So this is the kind of flexibility these small grassroots sustainable businesses can bring on. So when we talk about sustainable lifestyle or sustainable consumerism, I think there are two mantras. One is buy less or buy better. By buy less, I don't mean that you don't buy, but what you buy is probably like we do a lot of upcycled clothing. So when you're buying upcycled clothing, you're actually buying less because you're not using a new cotton or not using new raw material. And by better, you means you ask questions. Where is my product coming from? Who's making it? So these are the kind of debates we need to get into, and these are the kind of myths we need to bust. People like us, people like Shira, people like Uma, Leena, Rema, Pradeep, we need to bust these myths that sustainable business are not profitable. You have to sacrifice profits. They are not kind of proper business. They're not formal businesses. They are formal businesses. If you see globally, what we are hearing is 1 million garment workers in Bangladesh are losing work. in good times they are underpaid. Imagine what they will be paid. I mean, what will be the situation post pandemic? But if you compare it with social enterprises or fair trade businesses like ours, like yours, or like Uma's, or so many fair trade businesses or social businesses, none of our organizations have retrenched any staff. We've paid salaries. Correct me if I'm wrong, Uma. We have not asked
Yeah.
anyone to go away, anyone to leave. We've not cancelled any of our orders. We are taking responsibility as a business for our producers. Our producers are taking a responsibility to keep the the machinery going. They are ready to work. They are ready to produce. They need facility of purchasing raw materials. They need the logistics to run. So they are taking that onus to keep the economy going, because uh, producers will produce and things will get sold, and then there's cash in the people's hand. That's how the economy will move. Otherwise it's going to be standstill. So I think sustainability has to be looked from a very large perspective now. It's not only about consumerism, it's about production. And why sustainable products, sustainable fashion, or sustainability is expensive, that needs to be brought out so blatantly now. So advocacy and education has to go hand in hand with end to end sustainability, like end to end production, transparency in the supply chains. People have to know that comparing a sustainable product with a non-sustainable commercial product is at the beginning itself unfair. You cannot compare both. So that's unfair at the beginning itself. And why sustainable products will cost more? Because you're paying fair prices. You are taking so much of risk for the producers from the marketing point of view. You are ensuring that villages or rural people are not forced to migrate to cities to work in construction sites. You are helping them build infrastructure in the villages, in their local conditions to work. This add to the costs of the product. So that is the cost of the product. It's not spent on advertising. We hardly have any advertising budgets for our organizations. We don't spend in PR. We don't spend in advertising. So that's where the cost of the product that a consumer pays goes back to. I think that needs a lot of advocacy and awareness generation and education, and using a lot of technology driven platforms, whether it's digital technology or other kind of platforms, to ensure that at one end you are ensuring that there's transparency to supply chain, which sustainable production actually entails, and on the other hand it's education and awareness and
Absolutely
advocacy.
right. And I think, as you said, it also pushes us to find new opportunities for our producer groups or artisans.
Yes.
Leena and Sriram wanted to add something. Leena, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I basically wanted to pick up on what Sujata said, that transparency is, like, I think, one of the key issues. And ideally also transparency, like, for all sort of clothing, so that people also understand what is the human cost to a very cheap product, or what is the environmental cost to fast fashion. Like, if one speaks to people who are in the non-sustainable fashion sector, they talk about like how entire seasons of clothing are burned before even leaving the warehouse because they're out of fashion again. And that, like, the sort of fast buying and fast throwing has even in the background like this huge amount of material which is like just produced and being burned, like it's produced for nothing. So yeah, I think transparency should really go across all fields, or even just provoking the consumer to question, like provoking the consumer to ask himself, is it possible to buy a jeans for 500 rupees? If one just thinks of, like, just make the consumer aware what all goes into a product. Something needs to be grown, like be it like the cotton or be it like synthetic fabric. Then it needs to be dyed. Then it needs to be transformed into fabric. Then it needs to be stitched into the fabric. So who all needs to get a chunk of this? And is that possible that everyone gets a fair chunk for a decent living if the end product cost is only that little? That was one. And the other small comment or question I wanted to throw up is, like, in terms of profit. I think actually a limit in profit is something which provokes a sustainable lifestyle as well. Because if I have like enough to have a decent living, but not more, that makes me automatically like have a more sustainable lifestyle than trying to like reach profit margins that many of the large brands or corporates have. So the question I wanted to throw into the room, do we even want to strive towards like these huge profit gains, or is there like a sustainable profit which is enough to pay us and our workers a decent living, and do we need to earn more?
Absolutely valid. And also, I think this hidden costs in fast fashion when it comes to a cheaper product, I think that cost is the environmental cost, what we pay for, you know, what the environment takes the brunt. Sriram, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, a couple of things. Thanks. One is just to throw a data point based on what Lena said. Actually, in the world today, every second, a truckload of garments are burnt. Every second. It's a scary statistic, and it is only going to go up. And also, what has been found is from 2000 to 2016, the amount of garments purchased, by the way, because we're talking garment purchase quantities have gone up on an average per individual by 40%. But 60% of the clothes live less than half the life they can live. It's a scary thing. And, you know, I'll tell you why I'm telling statistics, and I have another point to add from what Sujata said. The reason from Sujata, I wanted to say one thing. But one more statistic I wanted to really share, you know, especially for some of the people around, because I think it'll add value, is, you know, just to get your head around the kind of impact we're talking, right? One t-shirt has, you know, if I tell you that one t-shirt has 50 kilograms of carbon footprint, or it might not, you know, even working in climate change, you cannot really understand what it means, right? But Bangalore, which is a water parched city, let's look at it from water point of view, right? An average t-shirt takes anywhere from something like 1700 to 2100 liters of water per person. So even if 10% of Bangalore population, 10%, that's a million of us, slightly more than a million and above of us, buy one t-shirt less than a year. On average, we buy 3 t-shirts. One t-shirt less than a year. We're talking of having nearly 40,000 people's annual water in Bangalore. 40,000 of us in Bangalore, or it is equivalent to 2 full days of full Bangalore city's water availability. It's insane amount of water we're talking, and we feel proud that we're buying cotton and all that, right? So the idea of ethical cotton, organic cotton, being conscious, ultimately we're talking about consciousness. And I'll talk about reused in a second. But coming to Sujata's point, what I wanted to say was, see, I think where sustainable living is challenged in anything, right? Now, I have a used phone, a broken phone. This is a second-hand phone. I used to work in telecom, so I used to have the latest and greatest phones always. But once I shifted to this life, I don't need a latest phone. I don't need to be having the latest laptop. So pretty much all my electronics are used because they use 60% lesser energy, 70% lesser water and all that. But this is knowledge only we few in the space of sustainability know, right? And so how do you challenge this? So we have to take the same approach what an H&M, I'm taking H&M, beating up, they have certain good things also. But the H&Ms of the world are doing is, they have found a fantastic way to market and ultimately create an aspiration. See, I think where sustainable living is faltering is we're not creating aspiration. The non-sustainable life has created such an aspirational value that people vie for living like that. It's the same thing we should do. I'm wearing a Tula Kurta. I should proudly talk about it, saying why Tula Kurta is good, and you know, anybody else who's, you know, the meager number of followers I have, I should make it such an aspirational thing that everybody should feel like. I think we're losing out on that culture shift, right? Consumerism is a challenge, but we can't live without it, right? Ultimately, we will be consuming. So all we can say is, if there's an aspiration created towards the wrong kind of product, wrong kind of living, can we create an equally strong and powerful aspiration? Almost like a guy who used to tell me way back in 2010, when I used to work in restaurant sustainability, he used to say, I want to put a miniskirt to sustainability. And I hate the way he said it. There are so many wrong things in the way he said it. But the point is very strong, right? The point is that, can I make it aspirational? can I make it so strong and powerful that people want to? And an example I want to throw into this is, I don't know how many of you have heard of the brand called Patagonia. If you haven't, and all the people I know on that are nodding vertically, I know this, but for the rest of you on the call, Patagonia is a brand who's mastered the art of making sustainable clothing aspirational. And they're vastly profitable, yet they're supremely sustainable in the way they do what they do. And
Yes.
I'm happy to share as much as possible. Almost every talk I give, one of the company always showcases Patagonia. And I say that is important. And I think that's that. So I want to say, into the culture, into our approach, we should create that aspiration.
Yeah, what you said is absolutely right, Shriram. To a large extent, I think sustainability remains within the people who are actively involved in, sustainable activism or sustainable businesses. But yes, how do we take it beyond the circle and make it more mass is, I think, truly a challenge for every businesses that is in this space. I think we now move on to Q&A. I think we have a couple of questions. I would love to ask a lot more questions, but unfortunately we have less on time. So if I can ask Pradeep to share what questions we have got from the participants.
Yeah, hi everyone. It was
Hi.
really lovely to have you guys speak about the sustainability. As we speak, we had like a couple of questions bouncing up on the chat. Mr. Manjunath wanted to kind of talk about, or wanted to kind of throw this question about awareness on sustainability. So how would you all like to kind of address it? Because a lot of people think sustainability, as we were all discussing, sustainability is like a luxury. And at the same time, like what Sriram just said, that he's wearing a Tula shirt, which is much more like cheaper than any other brand, but it's still so much sustainable. But a lot of people assume that it is like very expensive. About the what would you like? Any of you would like to pick this question and throw some light on this for Mr. Manjunath? Yeah, Sujata.
So the question was about awareness. Is that what it was?
Yes, awareness on sustainable issues and sustainable consumerism.
Yeah, I think Sujata is answering. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I said in the beginning that comparing a sustainable product with any a conventional product is kind of not fair at the beginning itself. But yes, completely agree with Sriram that it has to be built as an aspiration, and it has to be built as an aspiration to the younger generation. A generation, for example, my parents' generation, your parents' generations were a lot sustainable in their lifestyles because they were not exposed to so many, the globalized world or globalization. It was a different kind of a globalization for them. For them, globalization meant, politics, Vietnam, or culture, or those kind of things. But post 90s, the whole scenario has changed. People are more exposed to, the things which have made very aspirational. So the whole question is, how do you make things aspirational? How do we make it aspirational? Because most people, consumers, especially the younger generation, feel that sustainable products are not glamorous enough. They're not attractive enough. So I think that myth has to be busted, because the kind of products as a Sasha as an organization is working on, or what Ethicatic promotes, or what Uma's organization promotes, I think they're no less fashionable or luxurious. In fact, we started a tagline in Sasha called affordable luxury, that it's luxurious. I mean, luxurious is a very innate value. I mean, for me, a handmade product is extremely luxurious. It's a luxury. A handmade product, a handloom sari is a luxury, yet it is affordable. I mean, I don't need to pay I don't have to build a hole in my pocket to buy a beautiful Sambalpuri sari or a Pochampalli. So that kind of aspiration has to be built, and that can only be done through positive promotion. promoting it. So not only promoting the product, but also talking about the process, because the process is so time taking, so detailed. So talking of the process, talking about the producers, and also collaboration. I think it's such a nice gesture from Ethicatic to bring all of us together, because people who know Sasha are listening to this. People who follow Sriram are tuned into this. So this, all of us need to collaborate and then talk. It need not be a the uniform voice. We can talk from our own perspectives, but there has to be a common thread or a common line when we talk about sustainable lifestyles or sustainability. So, and that's how fashion industry, whether it's H&M or Marks and Spencer, has done, because they have certain common characteristics that they put forward and build the narratives, and that's how we also need to build that narrative and talk more about it, and of course create that aspirational value.
And although we create really good designs, and we also talk about the process behind it, like you said, Sujata, the people involved, who makes it, and we put a face to our weaver. And I'm sure Uma will agree too. I mean, the people who make the clothes for us are also so important in the whole process.
Yeah, because it's not about environmental sustainability only; it's about cultural sustainability of people
and social as well,
and social sustainability. The pandemic has thrown such stark realities at us, so it can bring out those aspects.
Thanks so much, Sujata. There is one more question, like many of them are answering, probably it goes directly to Sriram. How do you build aspiration, especially in the fashion industry? So that's the question that they're throwing a couple of them asking them. So would you like to take it?
Yeah, can I give you it's funny. Actually, it's in a way interesting that I talk, because I'm a consumer rather than a producer of clothing. So I can give an outside perspective, but in this space. So I would like to take an example of Patagonia again, and then stretch.
Or maybe you can say how you were, inspired to move to this. So then that will throw light into that.
Sure. And so I'll take both, right? But I was saying, I just wanted to say that this is in no way disrespecting any of the brands which are on the platform, on the call, but somebody I've really learned a lot from, right? So that in my mind, there are three players in this whole thing, right? Me as a consumer, as Rema was asking me, I have to look up. I always say that when you're buying, whether you're buying a tomato or you're buying an aeroplane ticket, can you ask that one extra question of, okay, where is this coming from? What has gone into making this? That's one question I usually tell people to. As a consumer, what can you start into this? Is ask the question. The more we ask the question, as Sujata said, the producers will automatically turn into share the story. I think when we start sharing the story, when a producer starts sharing the story and creating why they are doing what they're doing, I think the power of creating aspiration is in making a why and having great voices talk about it. For example, again, Patagonia, right? Patagonia knew this was important. Patagonia knew people are asking. The founder of Patagonia was an avid climber and a conservationist in South America. And so that's where the name Patagonia also came. And they were doing that quite a bit. I'll give a specific example. Let me put a question to everybody, right? Quasi-rhetoric. But when did we last go get a torn t-shirt or a torn jeans fixed? When did we last go get a shoe fixed? I looked for a cobbler for 1 month in Indiranagar to find somebody to fix an old Patagonia shoe I had. I couldn't find anybody. Those days are gone, right? We don't, because it's so cheap, we'll go buy a new one. So what Patagonia did, they said, you bring us any t-shirt. It doesn't have to be a Patagonia t-shirt or a Patagonia shirt. Any brand, you bring it to us. There's a stitch, they'll stitch it. They stitch it in a very visual way. Like the stitches are seen. And then they put a small patch, and they created a brand called Wornwear, WRN Wear, right? And they made the brand Wornwear very, very catchy. And they did enough advertising on that. So suddenly it became aspirational. Everybody wanted to have a Wornwear t-shirt. And so, and they are fierce. What I love about them, and which is what I know all of you have, is they're fierce about the values as to why they did what they did. I think the aspiration can come from those two, really strongly talking the story of why and what they have done. And the third, and this is a very Indian context statement I'm going to make, is India is ultimately a kitna deti hai country. That ad of Maruti is a fascinating ad. It's like a mirror on ourselves. This guy is talking about this is the fastest rocket, it'll reach Mars in 45 days, etc. And then there's this Indian guy standing there, he's making notes, he looks up and says, Acha, but what is the mileage? So we are a very numbers country. We discovered zero, we love numbers, right? I think if we talk numbers in a relatable way, like I said earlier, if I tell 50 kgs is a carbon footprint of my t-shirt, I won't understand. But if I relate it and turn around and say that's equivalent to 45 kilometers of driving in Bangalore traffic, that hits me immediately, right? Or 39,000 people not having water in Bangalore for a year, that hits me directly. If we can, so to me, those, just to repeat, right? Really a strong steer on the why and the what, creating the brand. And third, talk numbers in India. You can automatically create an aspiration. People would want to say, there are enough statistics in the world today that the millennials, under 30 people, yeah, those are millennials, yeah. These people, there's an increase, especially in the garment industry, that they're willing to spend 9% to 12% more if the brand says it is a conscious brand. And conscious is defined in a very loose way, but they're willing to spend the money. So there is captive audience there. The question is, are we creating? So the aspiration can be created like that. And the last thing I want to throw in here is the importance of government. See, there is consumer, I have to ask the right question and be willing to buy the right one. Producer have to tell the story, show the why, fierce value, why they're doing it, and numbers. The third is government, and I'll give you why government I bring up. Sweden in 2015, we all know we had value-added tax, now everything under this GST, right? What Sweden did in 2015, they figured people are not repairing stuff anymore. So they said, they passed a law, fascinating, they said that the VAT, the value-added tax, is slashed by 50% anytime you're repairing anything. From a small shoe to a refrigerator, a car, anything you're repairing, a tire retread versus getting a new tire, anything you repair, your tax is slashed by 50%. That's a government policy pushing, saying, we recommend you to please reuse, we recommend you to repair, we don't want you to constantly buy. So all three have to play a role. And if you do all this and publish the right way, aspiration is that people love to buy.
Also, one of the questions.
Examples, but I'm sticking to government as much as I can.
Yeah, but I love how you touched upon the policies, because I think government needs to support or have schemes where they support sustainable businesses or encourage people to get into more sustainable business and have schemes. Do we have more questions, Pradeep?
A couple of more questions, but they're more generic to everybody. Anybody would like to kind of pick? Maybe Uma would like to answer this. Like, they're also like, talking about sustainability and cultural products that have been made. A few of them are trying to understand the cost implication, like, for embellishments and embroidery, like, hand stitched jewelry costs are going up. How are you going to kind of, work on that to make it more affordable? Is what I understand what the questions from the participants are when compared to machine made and handmade, because automatically handmade comes under sustainability, but sustainability is kind of coming with a cost when compared to a machine. So how would you kind of do that, or like address it in terms of bringing awareness to what Sriram just added? I mean, would anybody like to add it in terms of having these kind of things coming in the way of your budgets or like the costs? And also one last question. Maybe
Uma's microphone is mute, I think.
Okay, so and one more last question. I think we're running out of time, and one more last question was also like, any of you or all of you, maybe it could take turns, would like to give some tips on sustainable lifestyle, which is also going to be a new buzz for the next post-COVID thing probably. So maybe all of you could also pick up that and then address the audience. Yeah, over to you, Uma.
I think Uma's microphone is on mute. Mic is on mute. Rima, can you tell? Yeah.
So it's a very good question, as I see that somebody has thought about that if you do a lot of value addition, the cost goes up, and how do you compete with the handmade and machine made in current scenario where there's a lot of option of a cheap machine, fake imitation is available. So I kind of look at it, if I look at my brand and how would I deal with it. My focus is value addition in terms of which, if it is done, it is articulated enough that it is done by hand, and not to compete with what machine is trying to do and put the handmade into the same perspective and try to win the game, which never will be possible. So even in the weaving, it's a very good example. Weaving can be that some of our Indian techniques are not possible to copy on the machine. And even the today, we are trying to imitate ikat in print and trying to do a cheap version of things. Communication plays a very, very important role. And in design, it can be rectified. In Upasana, in our design, when we choose to promote a hand technique, we talk about it as a process with a lot of support and build aspiration that it is something to be proud of. It is not a generally done thing. So that communication plays a building that aspiration. People want to know how it is done, and then they do appreciate it. We have a clients who love what we do and support us. Somebody else can take up the second question.
Yeah, I would like to add. I think historically machines were used to, make more products and make manufacturing easier. So value addition was never linked to machine. Value addition will only happen if it's handmade. It's like comparing, again, I'm just taking a name, example. It's like Pizza Hut or Domino's versus, the handcrafted pizza, the flatbread, handmade, handcrafted pizza, which is wood fire burnt oven. So it's like that. So where will you call the value addition? I mean, what will you call a value addition? So this thing has to be, especially people who are much aware and educated, have to understand that machines were never meant to create value or add value. They were made as an industrialized society to make more, to cater to more number of population, because population was exploding. So value addition always meant by hand, with hand. So there has to be a distinction. There will be a distinction. If a machine made is for precision. I mean, I would like to have think of a machine made in terms of a wristwatch, because that will be like, that's machine made, that's value addition, that's precision. So that distinction has to be very clear. When you're talking about sustainable lifestyle, that distinction has to be clear, that what kind of value a machine made product will offer you, and what kind of value a handmade, handcrafted product, which is also ecologically sustainable, which is socially responsible product, will offer to you. So it is really very driven by your value system on what you want as a consumer from a product. And what Sriram was saying, the whole ecosystem, how the policy environment is going to, facilitate, mobilize sustainable industry. Because every big corporate claims that they are sustainable because of the triple bottom line, they are, that's how they claim. But how does the government really, how has the Swedish government, really identified between what is a sustainable sustainable business model, or a sustainable economy? I also, when I visited a reused mall. There are malls, entire malls in Sweden, which only sell reused products, reused pressure cooker, and used products. So an entire mall is, and it's quite popular, and there's a lot of footfall. So the whole ecosystem, the whole economy, the whole policy framework actually drives it. So it's not only about a few people only talking about it. gradually the whole system has to push towards sustainable manufacturing, sustainable production, as well as sustainable consumerism. So it has to be like a concerted effort from all directions.
Yeah, I think, and also, like you said, now we slowly have some brands who deal with pre-loved clothing, and I think we ultimately come back to the basic of having awareness and widespread awareness, and probably add this. Yes, Sriram, please. You have something to add?
Yeah. So I didn't want to cut you. I just raised hand. I wanted to add into it, saying this because I saw messages. Some of the messages were there are a lot of entrepreneurs also here. Looks like clothing entrepreneurs. So there's another angle to this, which is we should also look at the change in business models. There's a Netherlands company, jeans company. What they did was, now they figured, so essentially there used to be something called SaaS, which was software as a service. Now the new SaaS is service as a service. Sustainability has reached it. I'll give you an example, non-textile, and I'll bring to the Netherlands company. When you buy a washing machine, what do you actually need? You need to wash your clothes, right? So you need, let's say, 10,000 washes. So Bosch then figured that why should people buy washing machine? It's a big giant machine sitting in your house. You'll use it for 5 years, then you'll throw it and you'll buy a new one, right? So their point was, nobody wants really washing machine. They want washes. So now they've changed the model. They're saying, I will sell 20,000 washes. And so you're buying 20,000 washes. There's a simple counter on that. And if within 15,000 washes, Bosch actually has an upgrade to the machine, which is going to be more efficient on water, more efficient on detergent usage, they'll bring the old one, bring a new one, replace your old one with the new one, and take it back and repurpose the parts. BMW is doing that with cars. Renault has done the car manufacturing like that. So this Netherlands-based jeans company has now said, I will sell 1,000 jeans wear. At the end of it, you can go drop your jeans with them. They recycle 97.4% of the jeans. 97.4% of the jeans, every piece is taken, it is broken. They show the process of how it again becomes a new jeans. So you don't have to keep old jeans, which 4 years later you have to break your head, cut it, make shorts out of it, make bags. I mean, you don't have to do all that. The producer is taking more responsibility, and it's an innovative idea. Your raw material is already coming back to you. I don't have to stack. I don't have to have this big house of, my garage filled with stuff. Indians are also becoming that. It used to be earlier. I mean, I lived a decade ago in the US, and now increasingly in India, we have garages filled with stuff which are unopened, right? We are going that direction. So we have still a chance to turn back. It might be a small percentage, but that small percentage of Indian population creating an aspiration for the rest.
And in a way, it finishes the circle also, right? It goes back to the producer.
Absolutely.
Sujata, you wanted to add something?
Model.
I think just taking what Sriram said a little bit further is, we have to offer solutions to the customers. And these are the examples which Sriram said, that that's the way, we have to offer solution-based products. Either it should be solution-based services or products. For us in this sector, it's more of products, solution-based products, but it can also go along with an add-on on solution-based services. For example, bending clothes or menders. I mean, we work with like so many stitchers and all, and you don't find menders in the cities. Yes, right. Even if you go to a large laundry chain, now they find it very difficult to mend rafu. The rafu cars, you don't find them anymore. So we need to be very creative in those aspects and offer solution-based products or solutions to the consumer, like like some of the examples that Sriram gave.
Thank you, Sujata. And
one last question, Sriram, directly to you. What was the name of the brand? The brand that you were talking about is in Netherlands?
Yeah, it's called Mud Jeans. MUD, Mud Jeans.
Okay, Mud Jeans.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It have a very nice advertising. There's a video circulating around in WhatsApp and all that, I'm sure.
You're from Netherlands, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we can take one more last question and we can wrap. Anybody has any questions? I personally wanted to ask all of you one question about the SDGs. Now, all of us relate the most to the SDG 12, but do you think there'll be increased focus on that, or will the priorities change as countries relook at their economies, social development, and all sorts of development? Do you think there will be a shift in the focus, or what do you think? Maybe Leena and Shriram can answer this. Yes, Shriram, you can go first.
Sure. I think what is fascinating is India is one of the few countries in the world which has really taken SDG adoption and SDG based documentation very seriously. One of the very few countries in the world. How much we do is another story, right? But so SDG 12 is what we all have directly in action, but policy around I'll give you macro and a micro, right? Banks like SBI, HDFC, Asia Development Bank, today when they give you a loan beyond a certain amount, they mandate that you have to give an SDG report, SDG impact report. So you have to give that. If Tokyo is giving a loan to Chennai for its water improvement, it is asking for an annual SDG report. We ourselves are helping some of our clients now create annual SDG reports. So SDG reporting has become important. There is Niti Aayog has a top-down approach. Government has set up an IAS officer sitting on top in India, in central in Delhi, who mandates SDG adoption at every state, and each state has to give back. There's a beautiful dashboard also created, an Indian dashboard public, which will give. So the importance of SDG-driven structure to sustainability communication as well as strategies is key in India, and it is only going to increase. In fact, I would even say that the more of the newer brands, some of the entrepreneurs on the call, if they are able to constantly show their SDG impact, it will help them getting loans, talk to people will know about it. So I would say SDG is rising, and people have their own law. It's much, but at a producer level, at businesses level, individuals might not, but producers definitely, government is definitely asking.
Thank you. Leena, would you like to add? Because you also work with policy makers and...
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure whether you meant whether like the focus will shift away from SDG 12. I think that will happen in the near future because other SDGs like no poverty, good health and well-being, and climate change are, in the light of all this, more and more pressing. Like, I mean, I'm sure you all know that there's a super cyclone to hit West Bengal again, which is again a function of effects of climate change. So I think these extreme weather events will become more and more, and because of that, the focus will be on those SDGs. However, I hope that people who are more in the consumption and producing sector and can afford it will continue to look at that, because in the end, the SDGs, if one looks at them, they're all interconnected. Like responsible production also means decent work, for example, and in a way also no poverty. And responsible consumption, again, reduces carbon emissions and hence like contributes to climate change. So I think it's important to see that all these SDGs cannot be seen in isolation, but that they are linked in one way or the other. And I mean, what we are doing with BSF specifically is look at the SDGs through onto Bangalore, because in urban scenarios things are different, and I guess SDG 12 might be more a focus in an urban scenario.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you. And I think to summarize, we all look at it as opportunities, and the focus for sustainability is not reducing or going away or anything. And I feel all the panelists think that there is more focus on sustainability, and that's the way forward. Thank you all for joining in today and sharing your really thoughtful and insightful views and opinions. Thanks for your time. I'm glad we could do this in short time, and we had some great questions and good participation. Thank you so much, and I hope to organize something like this soon.